We're trying to...
Full Contact. In association with Mitsubishi Motors. Drive your ambition.
Hello and welcome to Brian Moore's Full Contact with the Telegraph and Mitsubishi. We're just 25 days, that's all we are away from the start of the 2019 Rugby World Cup in Japan. We're with you every Monday here on Full Contact for the entire build-up and, of course, throughout the tournament. England laid down a bit of a marker ahead of next month's tournament by thrashing Ireland at Twickenham, and we'll be debating where they now rank among the favourites to win the competition. As for Ireland, well, they looked a bit of a shadow. Well, not just a bit. They did look a shadow of the side that went undefeated in 2018. And we'll speak to journalist and former player Liam Toland about what the expectations are now for Joe Schmidt's side. We'll be discussing the landmark moment in the women's game after World Rugby became the first major sporting federation to adopt a gender-neutral naming for the tournaments for the next World Cup in 2021. We'll be speaking not only to sponsorship expert Tim Crow about that, but also the England player Sarah Hunter. But right now I'm delighted to announce that alongside me today is the former England hooker and World Cup finalist George Chuter. Hello, George.
Good afternoon, Maureen.
England-Ireland. Don't think anyone expected a 57-15 scoreline. In all these things, it was a case of England being very good actually, and Ireland not being good at all. What sort of balance between those two do you think it was?
I think fairly extreme on both sides for us. I think Ireland did look very rusty. They certainly didn't look. I mean, they weren't that impressive against Italy the previous week either, if we're honest. But in all fairness, England were very sharp. They played at a pace that Ireland just couldn't get anywhere near. They were accurate. They were the defensive line speed was outstanding throughout the game. Set piece was strong. They upset the Irish set piece. The scrum was probably slightly edged towards Ireland, but I think every other facet of the game, kicking, passing, handling, England were almost on another level, I think, which is very encouraging from an English point of view, probably a little bit worrying from an Irish point of view.
Ben Ryan told us last week that he didn't believe England had a great chance of winning the World Cup with George Ford at 10, and indeed, I've been an advocate of Farrell at 10, but Ford's performances in the warm-up games, especially with England on the front foot, have been very, very good indeed. Yeah. What do you think of that particular axis, and whether or not you which fly half, which centres and so on? Because it's an area with a lot of options now.
I have to confess I've been a Farrell fan for a number of years now, and I don't think he's a better rugby player than George Ford, particularly going forward. Ford is a far more instinctive, natural player. Farrell is far more sort of mechanical, and his game is not. He's not a natural footballer as such in the way Ford is. But England have always played better with Farrell at 10. However, over the last year at Leicester, George Ford has been absolutely outstanding behind a pretty woeful pack and in a pretty woeful team. And now, as you said, with these two warm-up games so far, he's been absolutely fantastic. So 3 warm-up games, he's been absolutely fantastic, and he's made it almost. He's always forced Eddie Jones' hand. He's got to pick him because he's playing that well, and there's nothing else you can do as a player. Now, I think I'm not convinced Eddie Jones will go with the 10-12 Ford Farrell 10-12 axis in the early stage of the World Cup. I think he'll still want to stick with Farrell at 10 and perhaps sort of Slade Tuilangi combination in midfield. But if George Ford, he cannot do any more. He cannot have done any more to make himself first choice England 10. And
I tell you what, John, he's given. I mean, we always knew it was an option, but you can see that it's not just an option where you think, oh God, we've run out of ideas, let's try this one. It's one that you could actually use, in a much more positive way.
Definitely. And that's a massive credit to George Ford. I think he's probably had some criticism from Eddie Jones in private as to areas of his game that needs to work on. I would say probably defensively, he's while he's not a coward by any stretch of the imagination, he's a relatively passive tackler because of his perceived lack of size, whereas Owen Farrell is in more of a Johnny Wilkinson back row type tackling 10. But George Ford has worked on his game clearly, and whilst the defensive side of his game is improved. He's not lost anything in attack, and as you said, on the front foot, and assuming England will get on the front foot more often than not, on the front foot he's been irresistible of late.
Well, this always happens. An identified weakness comes along. We've no sevens, we've no tens, etc. And then loads just appear from nowhere. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And they've tried Curry and Underhill. They seem to dovetail quite nicely at 7 and 6, notwithstanding the fact that actually, frankly, the challenge from what is a very good Irish back row just simply didn't materialise. Do you think this is part of Jones' thinking as a positive combination, or just something he's trying in case he gets forced into that situation during a game?
I think potentially a little bit of both, Mauro. We were speaking off air earlier about the pacing that they're playing at, and having 2 out-and-out sevens in the back row does give you that extra bit of pace around the field from your forwards. Add that to a couple of props like Sinclair and Genge, or maybe a Marlon not so much, and the 2 second rows or 2 of the second rows that they've got, and you've got a really, really mobile, fast pack of forwards.
And a good ball handling
absolutely,
from 5 as well.
The only reservation I would have is that Mark Wilson has been England's best player probably since he's started playing for England, certainly through the Six Nations in the autumn last year. He's been outstanding, and I think the balance of the back row just looks better with a sort of proper out-and-out 6 in it. Maybe that's me being a little bit old school, but even the Australian Pocock-Hooper axis seems to have run its course. I think you just got to have almost 2 or 3 different options there. So if you have start with a Wilson, for example, at 6, and the game's actually a little bit too quick, then you can chuck a Curry or an Underhill on and redress that balance. Or maybe you start fast and look to close out the game a bit tighter. I don't know, but I think that's an absolute wealth of riches in the back row for Eddie Jones at the moment. With assuming Billy Vunipola stays fit, he'll play that role at 8. Obviously, he's head and shoulders above the other 8s, I think. But I mean, what a luxury having those 2 guys, Curry and Underhill, fit and firing, and Mark Wilson there as well. It's
absolutely. I mean, one of the knock-ons from there though is, I mean, I know that Curry took a couple of line-out balls, but he's not been asked to do that in the past. And when you get into the maelstrom and the very heaviest parts of games when things are flying around, you revert to type, and the line-out options are something you've got to be always very careful of because you need to retain those. I just wonder in the end whether it cuts down their options a bit more than they'd like to, irrespective of what it brings around the park. Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly right. You've got to get the balance right, and it's great having 2 guys who can fly around the field and scrap on the floor. But then, as you say, if you're struggling to line out, you've only got 2. Well, I mean, I wouldn't count Billy Vunipola as too much of a line out option either. So you've only really got the 2 second rows as genuine line out options. That's where you would miss a Mark Wilson or an out-and-out 6 if it's Laws or Itoje slipping in there, whatever it is. You definitely do need that sort of 3rd/4th choice line-out option, certainly. Eddie Jones has already said that he's not going to pick his starting 15 before he gets to Japan. I've always thought that would be a mistake, but actually the way in which they've improved time after time just being in camp shows that they're doing something right, and I think it doesn't matter now. Jones, this is a point about the way that games go. It's not necessarily if you have injuries between games, because you can cope with them. It's in games when your first choice goes down and your substitute from the bench goes down, and then you're starting to say to, well, go on, who do we play there now? Yeah. He's had so many different combinations that have now started to look good and work that I'm struggling to see, barring an absolute disaster during a game, that he hasn't got fairly good cover for whatever is thrown at him. Yeah, it's almost the complete opposite to what happened with Stuart Lancaster's build-up. He chopped and changed a lot and actually went into a World Cup with a squad that was very undercooked, and he probably didn't know his first 15, let alone his first 22, whatever it was back then. Yeah. Eddie Jones appears to have gone about it a similar way, but with a completely different result. In as you say, he's had a lot of players come through the door and play. Some of them are still around. Some of them have been discarded as either works in progress or not good enough. But here we are now, 25 days before the World Cup, and he has. We've just been talking about the back row, but there's plenty of positions on the field where he's spot for choice, and whether that's
crafty management and crafty coaching by Jones, or just blind luck because the players happen to be in form at the right time.
It doesn't matter though, does it? It doesn't matter which it is.
It doesn't. You're right, but here we are. And like you say, we have got a squad where every position, bar probably 9, I think, there's a couple of players at least everywhere who you'd be very, very happy to start in a Test match. I mean, that's no disrespect to Willie Hines, but he's very inexperienced at this point, and that sort of counts against him a touch. But what I would say, I guess Eddie Jones wouldn't be able to pick his first choice 15 before the World Cup, because I don't think Jack Noel will be fit. I don't think Henry Slade will be fit. I suspect that they would be. Well, certainly Jack Noel would feature in a first 15 somewhere or other. Slade, I'd say, would be very, very close.
Well, in 2018, when Ireland had their historic win over the All Blacks, a lot of people in the rugby world, I was one of them, said that Ireland had the strongest squad they'd ever had. A lot of people in the rugby world, and I wasn't one of these, said that England were on the way down and Ireland were on the way up. It didn't look like that last Saturday at Twickenham, and George Schmidt, the Irish coach, said that Ireland were behind England in their preparations. Why don't we speak to Liam Toland, the Irish Times and former Leinster and Munster back row, about this. Hello, Liam.
How are you, Brian?
I'm okay, mate. George Schmidt said Ireland were behind England. They certainly looked like that. The amount of work they have to do to catch up, can they do it in the very, very short time now before everything kicks off?
Well, I suppose in answering the question, Brian, I'm reminded of the prime principle in employing force or power in the pursuit of your team's objectives. And for anyone who's in Twickenham, or for me watching it from lovely Ireland, Ireland fails to become effective in what they wanted to do, and that's a real concern, particularly the mood that England were in. I think leading up to the game itself, Brian, I think no one would have been overly ambitious around the result for Ireland in terms of Ireland winning, because of the obvious fixtures that the important ones that England played against Wales put them ahead of us. And I'm not sure about where we are in the cycle in terms of our pre-season training. So the Irish players individually looked tired, looked fatigued, and the unit skills was pretty appalling in lots of cases. And I'm talking to two hookers now, of course, today, but I thought the Irish management of the line-out was very, very weak. And you could link that to 4 or 5 tries, certainly, that were scored by England. So there's things that we saw on Saturday, they were very fixable. I think with the right people in charge and the right people running the line-out will make a huge benefit for whoever's throwing the ball in. That'll improve. I think, though, that the great worry for me is when Ireland are in possession, that's when we're going to struggle against sides like England, which has happened 2 times in a row now, where England were able just to triple team the ball carrier and make the breakdown become a real mess for the scrum half and subsequently for the back line. So when we're in possession, that's a worry. We don't have a subtle counter-attack. We're attacking very narrow out, which is what Joe Schmidt built the great victories over New Zealand and other great teams. It's a very efficient one-out rucking system, but against players the power that England brought on Saturday, wow, there's a need for a rethink.
Well, Liam, I mean, part of that ascension was based squarely on a very accurate, a very intelligent kicking game, not just for exits, but in an attacking sense as well. It was the first time, actually, that I can remember for several years where I couldn't actually understand what Ireland were trying to do when they did have the ball. It just seemed incoherent to me. On the one hand, a bit of a kicking strategy. On the one hand, a bit of a one out. On the other hand, a bit of a lateral movement by the backs, which was done not really at pace and not with enough, certainly not enough inertia and not enough accuracy. But overall, it just seemed confused to me. And I wonder what it felt like to you.
Well, like when we look at this, we can look at the who, what, where, how, and why. But I suppose what we're trying to find out today is the how and why. Why was Ross Byrne under so much pressure? Now, first of all, Ross Byrne is the 4th choice, and if you factor in, say, a Paddy Jackson, who has been exiled to the UK for all the reasons we're aware of, he might be the 5th choice out half. So I think it'd be unfair to overjudge his performance on Saturday. He's not a Johnny Sexton. He may become one, but he's certainly not one now. So he's not the type of guy to kind of grab the fixture by the scruff of the neck. So I think we need to temper our overall assessment of Ireland based on some of the players. But the platform that Ireland, and I go back to the line-out, I couldn't understand it. When I was captain of Leinster, I used to be the line-out caller, and Shane Byrne was the hooker, test line, all that sort of stuff, because his needs and my needs were very different. I was thinking the team, whereas he was thinking of the hooker and his accuracy. But that has evolved to the modern-day line-out manager. How Ireland, with 3 line-out targets over 10 metres, couldn't source the ball against 2 world-class guys in the second row, but Teje and Cruz are just 2 targets. Yet England managed to completely ham-fist Ireland's platform, which is a hugely important platform to Ireland's attacking. We're a really good attacking team off lineouts, and we have scored tries against the best teams in the world from our lineout. That was completely nullified. And not only that, we lack the ability to soak up time and pressure through a line-up maul, which all the things that filtered from that. So I think the first thing that Ireland need to do is fix that and get the line-up manager, be it Toner or James Ryan, and fix that, because England should not have got the amount of success they did, regardless of the world-class second rows they have. That will improve things. The midfield, I felt, there was no one prepared or able to kind of a go-to player to help Ross Byrne out, but in a leadership sense, communication-wise, or indeed in action. And someone like a Chris Farrell is just so big. He's the type of player who might be able to do that, or a Henshaw might be able to do that, but certainly Bundy Aki wasn't able to do that. So the other fact is that the Irish forwards, when carrying one out again, like CJ Stander carried the ball twice in anger, really, and he's our supposed go-to ball carrier. He carried the first ball in 47 minutes and the second one in 68 minutes and gained no ground. So there's no one in the pack. One of your old stalwarts coached me for a while, Willie Anderson, and he used to do an awful lot of work around Conti. You remember him, Brian? You do?
Oh yes, I remember Willie, yes.
And he did a huge amount of work with us in Leinster around continuity, targeting soft shoulders, taking the contact in your terms, looking for an offload. And I thought what England presented, I know the back 3 were fantastic, and Elliot Daly and all that, but the real bit that impressed me about England was so many English forwards were presenting, taking the ball in their terms, running onto the ball, offloading, and there was loads of examples of it. And Ireland just simply don't look to hunt for an offload. It's not part of the Ireland game. We haven't evolved like England has over time, and we don't have the horses for courses either. So it's a real concern. I think the lineup will be fixed. I think the scrum shouldn't be a massive issue. I hope Cian Healy survives. But the real concern for me is when we have possession, what are we doing with it? And this is something that's been going on for 18 months. This is not just a knee-jerk reaction at the weekend. There's been a huge call here in Ireland for Joey Carberry to start, if not at 10, certainly at 15, to provide a second option that Elliot Daly is currently doing for England and others around the world. And we seem to have not evolved. Whether Joe Schmidt has a master plan remains to be seen. But my big worry is if we play a style of game that we've done against England the last 2 times against South Africa, with Rassie Erasmus as the head coach who knows Irish rugby inside out from his time in Munster, we're going to really struggle to win that corridor power. And if we do lose that corridor, then it goes back to your question, what's our game? And the only thing Ross Byrne could have done last weekend was kick the ball. And that gets you field position. But if you're losing lineouts and not competing, well, then you're not going to score tries. So there's a real worry, obviously.
Liam, it's George Chuter here, mate. Just sort of leading on from that last sort of bit of the conversation there about the squad. Perhaps a year ago, the Irish squad picked itself. Certainly, the first 15, first sort of 20 odd players picked themselves. Again, we're not pushing the panic button too much here. We do realise, obviously, different stages of development for the World Cup. All that, but do you think the Irish have got a deep enough squad to make some of these changes to the game plan that you're thinking of?
Well, first of all, I don't think we can go into the World Cup with a half-back pairing that we had on Saturday. I think you need world-class half-backs to be playing at world-class level, and it's a real worry about who that starting 10 might be. There's question marks over Carberry and there's question marks over Sexton. If we're losing those 2 guys, you're then into a very, very young out half who hasn't proven himself at that level. That's a concern, and that impacts then our ability to change the game in many ways. But Joe Smith appears to be a guy that the more successful he has become, the more conservative he has been with his tactics. When he was in Leinster, I know he had Nasiwa and these swashbucklers playing for Leinster, but they also played a really, really brilliant brand of rugby, attacking game, counter-attacking game. That seems to be lost. So I don't know in terms of Ireland's evolution, are they ready for an offloading game because there's no evidence of it? Are they ready for a counter-attacking game because there was a hint of it, to be fair, for Carney on the first half in Twickenham, but it isn't part of the DNA of this Irish team. So those two aspects aren't happening. And when you see how England now have been able to, I suppose, negate all of Ireland's game plan whilst also developing a power play and a counter-attack, it's really, really worrying. I'm not so sure we're going to be able to evolve quickly enough to be able to avoid, if we play South Africa in the quarterfinals, to have a game that avoids contact and creates space for others. I'm not so sure we'll get there in time.
Interesting.
Liam, the two games now, Wales are coming up. Now, they've got to balance the need to win and not go into a World Cup with the depressing record of 3 out of 4, the win being against Italy. But you've also got to look at the performance. How do you difficult for me from this side? What from your side are the priorities, and what's the mix between those two?
Well, I think that the performance on Saturday is going to be really difficult for a number of reasons. One, on the back of Twickenham, but two, it's Warren Gatland's last home game, if memory serves. So it's a big occasion for the Welsh and for Warren Gatland. So it's not going to be easy. In fact, it's going to be more difficult. I think there's going to be a massive improvement. Get the lineup management right. That's a huge thing. I would be slow to drop, I don't know about you guys, but I'd be slow to drop Rory Best at this stage, but his position is certainly in doubt. But the problem for Irish rugby is the three to inherit the crown. I think Niall Scallon is certainly the strongest of the three as an overall game, but no one is really torched. There was no 20-year-old or 21-year-old just torching his way and just bullying his way into that position, which we've experienced over the last, say, 20 years. So I think there'll be some subtle team selection. I think James Ryan is hugely important, along with Devon Toner will make a massive difference. The back row, though, is going to be really interesting because on form, for me, Rhys Ruddock, Jack Conan, the number 8 for Leinster, and possibly Josh van der Fleer are the form back row. So there's going to have to be some changes. CJ Stander and Peter O'Mahony didn't offer enough last week. So I think 1 or 2 changes, certainly a change at 12, I think will make a big difference depending on fitness and that. But we've a real problem at 10. Who's going to actually be in control of this fixture on Saturday? So it's going to be a real challenge. Beyond that, I don't know, do they need to change a whole lot? But again, if you fix that line out, I think enormous positive things happen. But to finally say that Wales beat Ireland to win the Grand Slam in Cardiff a couple of weeks back, really, a few months back, they didn't have to play any rugby at all to win that game. They simply stopped Ireland from playing. And that, for me, is the key. Can Ireland, with the ball in hand, actually cause problems for the opposition? And we've seen in the Six Nations that England certainly, Wales certainly, and others were able to simply stop them from play. So that's the real big concern for me for this Saturday and for the weeks ahead.
Well, Liam, we'll find out. First time we've spoken to you on the Full Contact podcast, and I'd love to do so again. I thought that was a very insightful and intelligent contribution. Thank you very much.
A rare accusation on my behalf. Thank you so much. Take care, guys.
Take care, mate.
The couple of points he brought up were one about Rory Best. Now, look, this is not personal. I don't know Rory Best. I think he's been an absolutely fantastic servant, been a very, very, very good player. I just get a feeling, sometimes, and you can't prove this by fitness scores, but sometimes players are just starting on the slide, and it seems to me, you can blame timings and whatever, but simply on Saturday, some of the throws were just not there.
Yeah, I mean, I agree totally with what Liam said in terms of there's no one really pushing Rory Best as first choice hooker for Ireland. You've got Sean Cronin, the Leinster hooker, probably around the field the best of the lot. I think he's a smaller bloke, but he's very dynamic, but hasn't really nailed down his position. Niall Scannell, the Munster lad that Liam mentioned, again, his throwing is no more secure than Rory Best or anyone else's, so that's an issue for him. And then Rob Herring, who's got about 7 caps and hasn't played against anyone of note, is just very inexperienced. So there's a real, we were talking about the fly half issues. There's certainly an issue at hooker for Ireland, and I think Rory Best has been a fantastic player, but unfortunately time takes its toll. He's played 120 or 130 tests, whatever it is, 116 test, whatever it is, and that's a lot of miles on the clock. And and no one's getting any younger. Unfortunately, that sort of comes to us all. I'm not saying that it was his fault entirely. There clearly was an issue with the line out in terms of the calling and the execution of the lifts and the jumps. But as you said, some of the throws looked a bit wobbly, and some of that might be a bit of a confusion. Other bits might just be a sort of breakdown of his technique. But I just don't think Ireland really have. That's part of my question there. Do they have the depth to change the game? I think in certain positions they're very, very light. Yeah.
Well, Scotland, they avenged their defeat in Nice last week when they were absolutely woeful. There was a narrow win over France at Murrayfield. But look, that is a very necessary one, a good win. I always thought that Scotland would take time to try and gather their strengths, given they'd had about 15 players out. Yeah. So it's nearly half a squad who've got to be coming back in. And even if they are, which they are, very good players, familiarity and so on, it's a sort of thing. I think, you could cope with this if it's a year out. It's going to be very difficult for them, to get it absolutely right as to where they wanted to be with that. And I can see them, in a one-off game, I can see them, beating nearly anybody. But I just can't see over the course of a tournament, given the lack of preparation they've had with them all together, being able to sustain it for a proper challenge.
Yeah, and as always with Scotland, the big sort of question is around Finn Russell at fly half and his relationship with Gregor Townsend, and how is Scotland going to play? Are they going to play the pragmatic style of rugby that generally wins World Cup, or are they going to let Finn Russell loose?
Look, if you've got Finn Russell, you've got to let him play. I don't see the point.
Absolutely. But I mean, my point, and I've made this point many times, actually regarding Danny Cipriani, is you don't win a World Cup with a maverick fly half. You have to have a guy who's solid and plays to a game plan. Yes, a little bit of magic here and there. Someone like a Dan Carter, obviously, he was a bit of a freak of a player in the history of the game, but fundamentally, he was a very, very good, effective game controlling fly half. Yes. And then had a X Factor coming out there, Wazoo, on top of that. But Johnny Wilkinson, Stransky, Mike Liner, these guys, they all had flashes, but fundamentally they were solid players who knew how to play the game. And I just think Finn Russell would never win the World Cup for anyone, let alone Scotland. Carlos Spencer couldn't do it for New Zealand. I'm not sure anyone can do it.
Japan, I know a lot of work has been done with Japan to try and make sure that the host nation don't fall down. And indeed, they probably had the result, I think, of any World Cup against South Africa. Yeah. If you were them, what would you now be thinking about Ireland and Scotland?
Well, there's certainly blood in the water, isn't there, with Ireland? 6 months ago, the Japanese would have thought we've got no chance. Ireland are almost number one in the world. They've just beaten the All Blacks twice in a year, and this is going to be a tough ask for us. But in the last sort of 2 weeks, they've seen them just scrape past Italy and get heavily thumped by England. And Scotland have been less than impressive in the two games against France. So the Japanese, it'll be a massive tournament for them. They showed a huge amount of pride and no shortage of skill and endeavour as well, has to be said, in 2015, and came away with, as you said, probably one of the biggest upsets in the history of the Rugby World Cup. So they'll be there.
And of course they're at home as well.
Exactly.
Now that doesn't always go well. It didn't do for England, the pressure really told.
No.
But I think they'll be inspired this time.
Yeah, well, they're not under pressure either. No one's expecting to win it. Whereas England, perhaps there was an expectation that, it's home, we must get to the final. The Japanese will be out there. They've got nothing to lose. They've got everything to gain. They'll have the huge amount of support. The Japanese love their sport, any sport, even sort of a minority sport like rugby union. They'll get behind it because the Japanese are playing on the world stage. The games that they play, particularly those big ones there against Ireland and Scotland, the crowds will be bumping, but absolutely heaving, and there'll be a big ask for Scotland and Ireland to really get on top of the Japanese.
World Rugby get a lot of stick. I would defend them heavily in this area. In terms of governance, they're going to have a third of their positions filled by females. That far outweighs any of the other major sporting federations, and they've now gone some way to what they say is adopting a gender-neutral naming for tournaments. The Women's Rugby World Cup from now on is just the Rugby World Cup, and they claim it's the ultimate statement in equality. But is that a wise idea? What will the knock-on effect be commercially What will it say about the different identities? Why don't we speak to someone who knows what they're talking about rather than me? It's Tim Crowe, the sports marketing expert, who joins us now. Tim, hello.
Hi, Brian. How are you?
I'm okay. It's certainly a bold move. Is it the right one? What sort of impact will it have? First of all, on the game rather than any other aspects.
Yeah, on the game. I mean, I think there's a competition sort of going on here at the moment between different sports, different people within sports, different governing bodies to outbehave each other, actually, which is a good thing. I mean, I think in the UK, you can certainly trace it back to London 2012 and the fact that so many of the medals that were won by GB were won by women. The poster person of the games was Jess Ennis-Hill, and sort of the people who really picked up the button on that were BBC, Sky and BT, who've been in a competition on this for a while. And this is very much part of it. Of course, it is spreading worldwide now. So it's a good thing in this, but it is very much about governing bodies sort of jockeying with each other to raise standards and to be seen as standard bearers.
Do you think it sets a precedent for other sports? I suppose it depends whether it's successful, doesn't it?
Yeah. I've seen, I saw some comments about people saying they'd be confused, which I did. People would be confused, which I did find a bit puzzling because, call me old-fashioned, but I mean, if it's in 2021, it's the women's. If it's in 23, it's the men's, and so on. I think most people should be able to get their hands around that. A lot does it, I think, depend on how they market it, how they brand it, whether it keeps its identity. But in respect of how it will actually play out, I mean, I think the more importantly commercially is, the effect that the TV companies have when it comes to marketing it, because they are the biggest marketers of any event. So what they do with it, I think, will be interesting, and how they react. And in sponsorship terms, I actually think it's what World Rugby have done, which is far more significant, is they've actually split the rights between the men's and women's now. So you can buy those separately, which you weren't able to do previously. And I think that's certainly going to be one to watch, because arguably that's far more risky than what they've done with the actual name of the tournament.
Have you a gut feeling as to how it will go? Because I know when we've spoken in the past, you've made the point very forcefully that the sponsorship area for women has companies queuing up to put money into it if the proposition is right. Yes.
Well, I think that like all these things, we're only going to find out until after the event, because obviously there are a lot of factors in this in terms of how it's priced. And what the package is and so on. I think that certainly an awful lot, for example, of the current sponsors of the men's edition of the game will, I would suspect, sign up to sponsor the women's edition, because you wouldn't, for example, if you were DHL, be that happy if FedEx or UPS came in and sponsored the women's tournament, which is, of course, now known as Rugby World Cup rather than Women's Rugby World Cup. So in that respect, actually, what World Rugby have done is quite a smart move. And I would expect that to be quite competitive, that area. But only time will tell, really.
I suppose you've also got to understand with brands, say, for example, you work with BMW, I know very heavily. If you think that females don't have a decision in who buys BMWs, then you haven't really done your research, have you? So you want to have both options covered.
Well, the sort of the stat that is really out there at the moment, and I forget which management consultancy came up with it, but I read the report. Is very interesting that women are actually heavily involved, and if not the main decision maker, certainly equal decision maker in 85% of all purchasing decisions. So right. There you go.
Well, there you are. Tim, just a final one. In terms of women's rugby going forward, do you think the adoption of the gender neutral thing is one thing that would come or should go down to domestic levels and all that sort of thing, or should we just wait and see?
I think it's a wait and see on this, actually, because I think when you've got a world tournament with the sort of coverage that it gets, I think you've got the luxury of being able to make decisions like this that perhaps people in other areas can't do, where they're striving to create an identity and, frankly, trying to tap into the market for women's sponsorship. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a wait and see one, and I would certainly advise anybody at sort of lower levels to retain their identity for the time being. But I think over time we are going to see gender neutrality creep in throughout the game, and I think that's probably a good thing.
Tim, great to speak to you as always. Thank you very much.
All the best.
Full Contact, in association with Mitsubishi Motors. Everyone's ambitions are different. You can climb to the top, or you could take on uphill battles of a different kind. You can explore for hundreds of miles, or you could begin a bigger journey. You can make time fly, or you could make it stand still. The Mitsubishi SUV range. Drive your ambition.
Very pleased to say we are joined by Sarah Hunter today, courtesy of Mitsubishi Motors, the proud performance partner of England Rugby. Hello, Sarah.
Hi, Brian.
You're back in the camp after the summer and the World Super Series. The women's game is, going rapidly apace, as is not only the professional, the amateur side. It wasn't like that when you were a child, was it? How did you get involved early on?
No, it certainly was. And I was fortunate enough to be in the right place at the right time. At the primary school I played in had got a guest community rugby league coaching, and they had to deliver to the class as a whole, both boys and girls, who weren't allowed just to do boys. So from the age of 9, I picked up and started with rugby league before I moved across to Union at the base.
Well, you've got an up-and-coming season, not a World Cup year. What are your aims for this season? Hello?
Hi.
Hi, did you hear the question? Sorry, you might not.
Sorry, I didn't.
Okay, I'll repeat it. It's 2 years' time, 2021, till the New Zealand hosts the World Cup. But what are your aims for this season?
Yeah, so I think we've literally, today's the first day back into our pre-season after our extended break from the summer tour. So I think for me personally, it's about playing well for my club, Loughborough Lightning. Mm-hmm. And then we go into autumn international. So it's very much about performance to get selected for those. And then we're obviously on a 2-year countdown. So we then go into Six Nations, and then it'll be into summer tour mentality. So the season, it comes up quickly, and then you're through it before you know it. But I think as we get closer to 2021, it starts to become very much about performance as a player. So the England team starting to squads being narrowed down in terms of thoughts for the World Cup, and it's really important for myself to ensure that I stay at the top of my game to maintain a spot in that squad, and then perform either for my club or for country.
Well, you've already won the World Cup in 2014. You're a runner-up in 2017. I presume you'd like another crack at Team 21. But what keeps you motivated when you've achieved so much, if not all, that you could do already?
Yeah, I think for me, it's that drive to become a better player. After 2014, if you sort of said, how much you're going to improve over the next 4 or 5 years, I don't think I would have understood how I could do that. But I think as I've become an older player and wiser, I've really started to understand that actually you can become better. The game has changed, so as a player, I need to adapt to that. But get to 2021 and hopefully win another World Cup would be absolutely amazing. But my drive is that I can be better than I was last season, and by 2021 I'd hope to be a better player than I am now. My game is certainly not the finished article, that's for sure, and our coaches are really good at continuing to keep challenging me as a player and how I can get better and how I can develop my overall game.
Well, we've just been speaking to Tim Crow, the sponsorship expert, about the decision of World Rugby to adopt a gender-neutral naming for the Rugby World Cup. So it's not going to be the Women's Rugby World Cup anymore, just the Rugby World Cup. On the one hand, it's a sign that the women's game is becoming more mainstream, but other people have expressed concerns about identity. What do you make of the decision?
Yeah, I think it's brilliant from World Rugby to recognise more gender equality across the sport, and rugby is rugby, whether you play it if you're a male or you're a female. And I think only time will tell about as the promotion starts to come out for 2021 and we build towards that and during it about how clear it is that it's the female game that is playing. And I do think maybe currently still at this time in terms of to generate interest and grow momentum of that, then do we still need to be the women's game? The other argument is, should they have gone, it's the men's Rugby World Cup 2019, and that still defines the two, but doesn't have any gender inequality because they've both been defined by their gender. The women's Football World Cup, significant that was, and how much support they got, and how much interest and how big that was. So I don't know whether it's necessarily we need to remove the titles. Maybe we just need to make it equal in both areas. What we don't want people doing is, there's a Rugby World Cup in 2021, and then going, it's the Women's World Cup, and then them being like, well, I thought it was the men's. It starts to, does it lose clarity on it? And I think only time will tell with that as we move closer.
Well, you mentioned the issue of gender and what have you, and I'd like to just raise the subject because several other people you know well, female players, have raised concerns about the case of Kelly Morgan, who was born Nicholas Morgan, who represented East Wales as a teenager and then wanted to identify as a female, has been taking estrogen to lower her testosterone levels for about 18 months, and he's playing for Porth Harlequin Ladies. Now, a lot of people have weighed into it. Daniel Waterman was saying she's concerned about this for the safety issue because the imbalance, even after taking the estrogen. Difficult area is this, fraught with lots of things. What's your view on trans people playing rugby? What's your view?
I think there probably needs to be a whole research done on the case. I don't think we've got enough information at the minute to be able to make a statement on whether it should be okay. I think what rugby is fantastic for us, it's that it's a sport for all, including transgender people, where they fit within the game and how they fit in, I think needs to be looked at on a bigger scale, because obviously World Rugby, RFU, from what I can speak of, is put player welfare at the forefront of everything now, and obviously that has to be maintained to ensure that the game is safe for everyone involved, whether that's female, male, transgender. It has to be able to happen, and I just don't think we have enough information to be able to make that call at the minute. But I think as people feel more comfortable in society going from one gender to the other, I think there has to be a place for them to be able to play sport. But how that looks as a whole, again, is relatively unknown at the minute. which I think we want to live in a world where everyone is accepted and equal, and that's really important. So I think we need to sort of probably start to prioritise some of the differences we may not have come across in the past.
Sarah, can I just say thank you for coming on the podcast? Look, great to have a good season. I'm sure you will. Make sure your standards keep going up, which I'm sure they will.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Well, George, we've both been in World Cups, preparations, finals. Actually, we both had, unfortunately, the same fate. But, I remember watching the 36-0 defeat by South Africa in the pool stages. And I just didn't see any hope. I'm a miserable git anyway, but I just couldn't see one. What was the feeling in the camp at that point?
Well, we genuinely couldn't have got any lower. We were, and people tend to forget this because we got to the final in the end. We were one of the worst England teams in history leading up to that World Cup. We'd lost heavily in Australia in 2006, in the summer in 2006, 2 tests over there, where I remember debut actually. Came back for the autumn internationals, shipped 40 points to the All Blacks, lost to Argentina, and then beat South Africa narrowly, and then lost to them the week after. So, and then the Six Nations following that, after we'd Andy Robinson had got the sack after the autumn, Brian Ashton came in the Six Nations. We beat Scotland and Italy at home. Lost fairly heavily away at Croke Park in Dublin, and lost away in Cardiff. And really, we went into the World Cup with absolutely zero form. And certainly very, very low confidence. First game against the USA, we won by about 10 points. Phil Vickery got banned for, I think it was a trip tackle or something like that. He got cited and banned for the next week. And then we run out against the South Africans and get soundly thrashed 36-0. And then we were lucky to get 0 on the day. So I don't think we could have been any lower. And there were some guys in that changing room who had been in the 2003 World Cup winning team. I guess they would have wondered what they let themselves in for. Johnny and Jason Robinson, Martin Corrie was involved as well, Delalio. I just don't think we could have got any lower. Properly scraping the bottom of the barrel.
What was the approach from that point on? Was it say, well, we can't get any, we've got to get better, or was it bloody minded and said, look, we've reached like an addict, we've reached rock bottom now, and we're determined to do whatever it takes to get better. It
was sheer bloody mindedness even, and a group of five senior players, Johnny, Ollie Barkley, actually, Martin Corrie, Lawrence. They sort of took it upon themselves to sort of restructure the game plan. Mike Catt restructure the game plan effectively and play to our strengths. Because I think for all Brian Ashton's vision and ability as a coach, and he was a very, very good coach, a fantastic coach, I just think he had a team in front of him that couldn't do any of the things he really wanted them to do as players and a team. But he was resolute and typically stubborn in his belief that we'll do it anyway, and that culminated in a heavy loss to South Africa. But I think the players then said, look, this is no good. We've got to play to our strengths. We're not an expansive team. We're not the Harlem Globetrotters or anything like that. We can't expect all our players to play what's in front of them because we're just not, quite frankly, up to it. But what we can do is we can scrum, we can maul, we can tackle, we can kick and chase and put other teams under pressure. And that's effectively what we did. And in all credit to Brian, he sort of stepped back a little bit and allowed that to happen. And that's a pretty big action as a coach in terms of handing out. This is 12 years ago now. The player power then were very much a thing of the future. The coaches were the coach, and that's what happened. But fair play to him, he stepped back and let us do what we wanted to do in effect.
Well, of course, that led into one of the best weekends of World Cup action I can ever remember, actually. Because I think were you down in Marseille when you beat Australia? And that's a hell of a ground, isn't it? And then,
beautiful.
Of course, everyone is trying to sober up to go home. And I remember a lot of my mates who'd gone down to that said they just stayed in the bars because when France beat New Zealand, they said the drinks just flowed from anywhere for free.
Incroyable, I think you call it. Yeah, well, that quarter-final win was, and guys who were involved in 2003 will tell you that actually almost meant more to them in 2007 because how far we'd slipped down and how much of an underdog we are. The Aussies were in the papers saying, "Oh, England, they've got no chance. We're going to wipe the floor with you." Lottie de Kierim in particular said he guaranteed a victory pretty much, and
never a wise thing, that is it? Never.
Well, it's the Aussies like a bit of that sort of mind game stuff, don't they? And every now and then it does backfire on you. And we knew that they were vulnerable. They played in a relatively easy pool. I think they won all their games, not conceded any points or certainly not any tries. But they'd never been tested. They hadn't been tested in those group games at all. So we knew that if we put them under pressure, again, if we kick and chase and tackle and harry them and put them under pressure, the scrum was going to be good, going to be a big battleground, which we won quite easily. We knew we could win the game, and it just came down to the last 5-10 minutes. Johnny sneaked us ahead after we got a penalty from the scrum, and then Sterling Mortlock had a penalty from about 45, maybe even on just inside our half, to win it effectively. And as he stepped up, the Mistral came in from the sea, as it does in Marseille, and just blew the ball slightly to the left of the post, and we won. And the great thing was we were in the old port in Marseille, and Marseille is just a fantastic. I mean, not so nice inside the town itself, but certainly around the old port, it's just beautiful. Yes. Some lovely restaurants and bars there, and we were mixing with all sorts of fans from all over the world who'd just come there, and we found these bars, and we were in a bar with primarily French in there. There were obviously a few of the English knocking around on that, and we were celebrating the French game, and then the final whistle went, and everyone was sort of cheering and hugging them. We realised actually we've got to play these guys next week, so the atmosphere turned a bit more hostile fairly quickly. But it was a cracking night. A few of the lads ended up on yachts and stuff like that, and the whole of the old port was just absolutely buzzing. It was a cracking evening.
Well, I remember as soon as the weather changed for the semi-final, I said France will not win this. They're not good in the wet, and indeed that turned out to be the case. So you get through South Africa again, having lost 36-0 to them. What's the psychological approach to that one?
Well, do you know what? And it sounds a bit flippant, a bit churlish, but actually I don't think that 36-0 really affected us, because after that game I think a lot of us had almost decided we're going to miss out on the knockout stages here. We'll just go out there, as we said, and we'll play what we can, we'll give it a crack, and we end up in quarter-final, we end up in a semi-final, so we end up in the final. So actually we probably didn't feel like we should have been there. So again, there was a little bit of a case of having no pressure. The South Africans were favourites, so clear favourites going into the tournament. They'd spent 4 years between Australia in 2003 and France in 2007 building a team specifically to win the World Cup. They had about 900 caps worth of experience in the team, and they were heavy favourites before the tournament, heavy favourites during it, and obviously going into that game. So we approached it the same way we would approach the sort of the Tonga game, the Samoa game, and the two knockout games. We're just going to go out there, we'll do our bit, we'll give it everything we've got, and we'll see where we end up. And then, again, that sounds a bit easy, it sounds a bit flippant, it sounds a bit blasé, but that's generally the sort of mental state we're in. We've just we've got nothing to lose. We're here. Did we deserve to be here? Probably not, but we are. So let's go out there and see what can happen.
What sort of, just finally, George, before we sign off, what sort of mood do you think England and their camp should be in at the moment?
Very positive, and they've earned that as well. They've been through some very, very high ups in terms of winning Grand Slams and beating Australia 3-0 in Australia and those sort of games. And they've been through some pretty low lows over the last two Six Nations, losing games that they shouldn't have lost and drawing this. I mean, there's something like the Scotland game that's probably quite a big psychological blow for a team to lose a 35-0 lead at half time and just end up drawing a game. So they've had some real cliche, the real roller coaster ride over the last 3 or 4 years. But they're in a place now. Again, as we said before, is it luck or judgment or a little bit of both? They're in a place now where they're really well set to go into a World Cup, confident. I'm not saying they'll win it. I'm not saying there's no guarantees in anything at all. But I don't think they could be in a better position right now with the World Cup less than a month away. And they've worked hard to get there. They've gone through all those ups and downs. They've worked hard, worked very hard in this pre-World Cup camp. They look fit, they look strong, they look fast, they look cohesive. So I think they should be absolutely buzzing, and probably they could do without this game against Italy, to be honest. I just want to get on with the World Cup and get out there for that first game.
Well, that's all we have time for this week on Brian Moore's Full Contact with the Telegraph and Mitsubishi Motors. Thank you to my co-host, George Chuter, and indeed to all our guests. Please do subscribe to the podcast to make sure you don't miss an episode every Monday during the World Cup, and write a review whilst you're there too. But for now, it's goodbye.
Full Contact, in association with Mitsubishi Motors. Drive your ambition.